His field of expertise is complementary currencies, and we are now going to explore the role of complementary currencies in an economic transition. I'm very pleased to introduce to you Leander Bindewald. The word is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. That was my last trip for this year, and I'm invited to talk about examples of complementary currencies, or community currencies as we mostly call them, as these beacons of actions for transition. You might have seen the program. I managed a big EU program for the last 3 years with the Economics Foundation in London, where we had several community currencies all over Northwest Europe that we piloted and kind of presented to the European institution and other policymakers as tools for sustainability. I just come back from Brazil last week, where there was the International Research Conference on Community Currencies, so there's a lot of things to talk about. But I do want to quickly take a few minutes to actually wrap that into a bigger topic, where I was really happy to have this great presentation from Ole earlier and also from Stacco. It might seem a bit unrelated to what I'm supposed to talk about, but I think it'll wrap up nicely. Because in presenting these examples of actions, there is, I think, an undercurrent there. There's a potential issue in terms of motivational empowerment there that I just want to allude to, and you can dismiss it or follow up on that. And it actually starts with a story on the flight to Brazil. There were only a few movies, so I ended up actually watching a children's movie, the latest thing by George Clooney. And has anybody seen or heard about the movie Tomorrowland? Can you raise your hand so I just know if there's enough people who have an idea what I'm looking at? I'm not used to it, otherwise I would have used the Matrix. Popular heard of. But Tomorrowland is a great movie. I do recommend you seeing it. It's a beautiful movie about narratives, and it has a beautiful narrative about narratives and how that relates to the mess we're in and climate change and saving the world and all. And now it's down to these people who also saw that, and maybe it's just me, and maybe just my issue, but if you see a movie like this, there's this one scene where the little girl is told by somebody, who might just as well be an alien, she's told, like, you are the one to rescue the world, you are the hero. And at least me in the plane, I mean, I was really tired and bored too, but I got a big rush out of that scene associating with that protagonist of the movie. And oh yeah, wouldn't that be awesome? But of course, these hero stories, right after the movie, leave you with this feeling of like, oh yeah, but I'm not the one. I'm not the selected one. I'm not the one who saves the world. And there's a lot, I think, to be said about hero stories in our culture, in our society, and how that might or might not actually help us to overcome the challenges ahead and to actually turn this transition into a transition that we actually want to live and support. And in a similar way, it often happens, and I did that over the last couple of years so many times, that I tell people about these awesome currencies out there. And there's two reactions to this mostly. One is saying, oh, but that's really great in Brazil, and that's really cool in Brazil, and that's really amazing in Nantes, but that can't happen here. Denmark is different, Denmark is small, Denmark is wealthy, we don't need a complementary currency, it would be impossible to do. The other reaction really is like, oh, that's so awesome, we're going to do this here, and then there's a lot of enthusiasm being thrown around, and a lot of emails, and a lot of phone calls, and a lot of meetings, and in the end, most of these initiatives, and it's probably not only in the currency world, but in other fields as well, most of these initiatives actually fail at the end. And then, of course, again, you have these demotivated, burnt out people who are just feeling like they can't actually do anything about the world. So with these potential problems there, or these two approaches to looking at an example and whether being completely disempowered right away or trying and failing and then having this reaction, kind of this, if I frame money here as a social technology, there's kind of a, dare I say, macho approach to technology, saying, yes, I'll use this currency idea, I'll throw it at the problem, I'll throw myself with it onto the problem, we're going to solve it. In the title and in the rest of what I'm going to say, there is, of course, this word social in front of technology, and that is just not a weird collocation where all the sociologists here would say, we don't know what either of those terms really mean, but social in this sense really also goes to say that it's about everything that happens around this realm of money.
I'm in Brussels and all that. We are talking about money all the time, and we talk about it as something that we all know. We sometimes inadvertently talk about it, or people hear us talking about it as if it was a thing, as it was something very concrete, very technical, very financial, really suitable for a business school. But money as a social technology is actually a much, much bigger topic, and there's many things that happen around that and have to happen around us. We heard about psychology this morning, and money and drives and desires and all these things, and that don't happen on the technical, technological level per se, but it's really about the conversation that we have, the awareness that we raise, the interaction that we do have with or without money and with other people. So in that sense, I'm talking about currencies. I actually just want to applaud you guys for actually being here today and spending this time and having these interactions with each other, and that is just as much an action for transition as any of those examples that we see today. So actually, a hand to you guys. And I'm going to talk about money as in a way that might be really strange. I'll need you to bear with me, and it might actually not be recognized as money in the end. And I had this great conversation with Rasmus even over dinner last night. And there's a few things that come into there. And actually, I want to start this whole story very simply in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So it starts very simple with a man. And I choose that picture, thinking it should represent myself, and I'll tell the whole story around this. But then today, actually, I realized, okay, if that represents me, and I want you to feel represented a little bit, that only represents at least half of you, which again is a kind of a hero dilemma story, where it also reflects. And I know the organizers try very hard, but it's also reflected strangely in the program of today, where we only have male keynote speakers. So it's not a blame, and I know they try, but it's still a facet of all these stories and the way we go about transition that just needs to be in our attention, just as a different framing of money needs to be in our awareness to actually get it. But anyway, this me being actually at a business school or at a university then, studying and trying to figure out what I want to do. I studied something to do with this first. I did biology for about a week. And after a week of realizing I finished a master's in biology in the end, but after a week I realized, okay, that's a bit limited. There's more to the world, and I thought the university actually teaches you something. So I'm the third philosopher today also. I did study social sciences, philosophy was my major, and that just represents the social system that is kind of embedded in our natural system, or just weaving this weird net around the world at the moment. And actually, people that I worked for at the time said, okay, now you're doing biology and philosophy, could you please do something useful? And strongly urged me to take a business degree. So I did that kind of stuff as well. Which was really terribly boring. And after 2 masters in business and everything, I just ended up in the same way, in 2009. And then luckily, I had a friend. So that's actually called Martin. He actually exists. He looks a bit different, but he has red hair too. And he asked me this question, which I'm really happy to answer because I was procrastinating writing my thesis. He said, okay, if you're smart, as Master of Science, Master of Arts, explain me the world and tell me what to do. Which was, as I said, quite funny. And I had this great, miraculous surprise at trying to figure it out and quickly write it down axiomatically. Trying to figure out, luckily we had this graphic earlier, so we're trying to figure out and reconcile everything about the economy and nature and society and our role in it and what we can do and what we can do in terms of transition and getting somewhere else. And you can try this exercise and someone, for me at least, under the bottom line, I kind of ended up with wondering about this again. Not in the terms of saying, oh, money is the root of all evil and it's the way to hell and stuff. It was really down to saying, money is a prevalent measurement system, and from biology I knew how important that is to have a good unit system somehow. And in our society, in our social system, there wasn't any measurement system that meant anything. Money is the closest we have, and it just is completely off. The more money you actually have somewhere, probably the worse it is for what we actually want to achieve. So I just ended up saying, oh, we need to change money. Why not? Let's try that. And that's what I then kept doing, and it was really kind of the way of going, how deep does this rabbit hole go? And I'll kind of take you to the edges to where I got down that hole next? And this is really the kind of the question that when I worked at the New Economics Foundation was at the heart of their process of grappling with this after actually having done 30 years of practice in complementary currencies. My colleagues wrote a book, which some of you might know, Where Does Money Come From?, which kind of just tries to explain how money is created at the moment. But struggling so hard for many years, they were kind of relieved in 2000, was it 14 or 13? 14. The Bank of England published 2 papers that told exactly the same story that that book contained, saying that 97% of all the money in circulation at the moment is created by private banks as debt at the point when they make a loan, and only very little of that money in circulation actually comes from the bank. Obviously you can't read this as just an illustration that the bank even tweeted about this with this pie chart. The big yellow part is the money created by private bank, the little blue sliver is what's left of sovereign money created by a state. There's funny comments, I mean the comments of course go on forever and ever. Try to find that tweet, it's really buried now, but first tweet goes like, how can someone deposit something that basically does not exist, and the next one goes, this is crazy, isn't it? And so on. So basically means, okay, money is mostly created by banks as it is. There are people and there are some remnants of practices that say it should actually be created by governments. Full reserve banking, just one keyword there, positive money is a great campaign in the UK, and I don't need to try to say it. Golden penny? Something like that. The less clear I try to say it, the better it comes out. If you have more questions around this or anything, actually, there's 2 workshops tomorrow where Rasmus and I'll be at least there for the first half, and maybe Ole will be there to go into these things more. And of course, one can at least theorize, and there is a lot of practices that I'm going to show you that people can just do that by themselves as well. They don't need neither government nor banks. Of course, government, just to mention that for me, is also not this juxtaposition, okay, you can rather do it yourself or you have government. Actually, government should be an extension of ourselves, and that we just happen to live in a time where nation states seem to be the norm. That doesn't really have to be so, I don't think. It's just down to us to find a better way of organizing our bigger societies and manage the mandates and the power we give to people. And then maybe that's actually all the same, the government or the people. But as things are, the moment people just stand for grassroots work, people on the ground, NGOs, private people, informal groups even, or even businesses kind of fall into this realm without banking license as well. They can and they do. So when they do that, that's called complementary currencies. If I say community currency, I kind of mean, step ahead these juxtapositions between for-profit and for-community. I kind of mean currencies that are created mostly as non-for-profit efforts by people who really care about their stakeholder value into this. There are a number of complementary currencies that are created for-profit. In the business sector, there's hundreds of local currencies, and I'll show you that later, that actually for-profit entity issues for other networks, and they function, and thus it's a great criteria for actually the possibility of these things, but there are a number of those that are actually more in the realm of explicitly contributing to a transition to a more sustainable practice. So I told you I'll need to open this idea of money a bit wider, and of course I started talking about currency, and I'll tell you why in a second. And if I do talk about currencies, this is what I kind of mean. Any unit system, and that is really as open as this first part of the sentence goes, any unit system that facilitates some collaboration in a community. And of course the question that begs is, okay, what kind of community are you trying to serve, and what kind of collaboration are you trying to see in that community that didn't happen just as much before, or not at all? And then the question comes, what kind of unit system, what kind of technological system, what kind of thing you might need to actually facilitate that. I only added this yesterday when talking to Rosamund, okay, I should mention then the relation to that and money. So anybody wants to mention an idea what money then is? So that's the definition of currency. That's all right. And there's two actually, yeah, sorry.
No, I was just wondering, communities would be very broad and...
It's all very broad. I mean, this is the broadest I could come up with. And as money then becomes, in my view, just a particular currency. And I normally say money as we know it, because that is of course also a cultural phenomenon that we need to be a bit careful with. And if I say money, I normally mean sterling, Danish kroner, euro, money as we know it. And that is just one potential, that's one existing currency, but it's only one of the many currencies I can imagine. And it just, of course, is then money for the community of the nation state, however well defined that community is. And it does facilitate a number of things. With the economy is what the money we have at the moment is facilitated by. If that is really something that we desire to have and that we want to support and that we want to have more of, is a different question, but money for me is a currency. Many other people, including regulators and lawmakers in the Bank of England, explicitly say it's the other way around. They would say a currency is a form of money, but they never explain what they mean with money. And even when they try to define currencies, it gets really wild, and it's kind of part of my PhD, but if you read these papers that were mentioned before, there's one trying to explain what money is. They have a glossary in the end. They define currency as the notes and coins, so the tangible form of money. But in the front pages, they would continue to talk about complementary currencies, electronic currency, which is a complete oxymoron then. If you said currency is the tangible form of money, you can't have that electronically. So just be mindful of these things, that the terminology is completely undefined. You can do it as you like. I use currency because it at least has in everybody's mind the idea of plurality. We always use currency in plural, use money as a singular, so it kind of embeds, or it takes you down the route of thinking about money as one thing, whereas currency actually opens that up to say, probably there's several, and just what kind of different kind of currencies there are is what comes next. So if you see many currencies and you say people are creating their currencies, of course you would go like, how do they do this? And what kind of things do they come up with? And for that, it's of course not scientific or academic or proven, and nobody agrees on typologies or categories of complementary currencies. But for these introductory presentations, I find it quite useful to rather talk about them as what they're good for. So really a design follows function kind of approach, where again, I use this as a shorthand because this is a bit too crude, but if these are the realms of our world, the nature, economy, society, at the moment we only have one kind of money, and of course you have different currency symbols in there, but it's all the same kind of money. We have that to try to do it all, and we wonder why that doesn't work so well. If we go down to complementary or community currencies, which conveniently are both abbreviated CCs, they just exist in different realms. They come for different functions. You can really separate things out. You can have one currency for this and another currency for that. You can design them with different features of what we know from money, leave out this sort of value function, leave out the, just don't worry so much about the unit of account, or have a currency that is a pure unit of account, has none of the other functions of money. And in this way you can imagine complementary currencies that are good for the environment. This is an example from Belgium, from one of our EU partners, where they had an incentive currency for recycling, actually run by the municipalities. I'll come back to this later. And what you see here is actually the Belgian identity card, which isn't the currency, of course. This is just a way to access your wallet by going to the municipality or logging in online with your identity number, and that you had an account linked to that. You can have currencies for in the economic domain, so to say, and it's just one of the many hundreds examples, but one from our EU project, so it's still in my slide somewhere. The Sonant was a currency instigated by the city of Nantes in France, and they gave the mandate to implement this currency to their publicly owned bank, the Crédit Municipal in Nantes, and they created now a currency for the businesses in the area of Nantes, hoping to provide them with cheap liquidity as a way to help the businesses in the region to flourish independent of international trade and financial markets and like that. And of course, in the last domain, you can have social currencies, and that is, at least in the English, in the French-speaking world, social currency is really a standing terminology. This is just one of the many examples, and there are also thousands out there that have these very social objectives. Often tends to be time banks, which again is why I had to broaden this terminology, because many people, economists would always say a time bank is not a currency, it has nothing to do with anything, but to us it is. So this is a program in the city of Amsterdam, where also the city council was involved to issue this particular time currency to help a local neighborhood to actually flourish and people to meet again, to contribute. It's kind of an incentive to volunteer your time, but it's a very particular way to reward volunteering where you don't pay people, which psychologically completely damages and destroys all the relations that you actually want to see happening. But you can acknowledge people's contribution and make them actually get something for their contributions in a very direct way. So just going through these different domains in a bit more detail, I just talked about this Mackie on the top there. You see, so Mackie, they actually come in paper form, and on the right-hand side you see the Prime Minister of the Netherlands at the time actually earning Mackies by going to this neighborhood, visiting them, looking at the project, understanding the project, working with the people there. For these 2 hours he spent there, he actually got 2 Mackies because he gave 2 hours, he receives acknowledgement of receipt of 2 hours. He can use these 2 hours to go to the theater there, he can actually go and access a haircut in a barber shop that participates in the system, he can do a lot of activities that the city and the other organizations involved make possible to access through this. In Amsterdam there was a weird hybrid again where you could also use these 2 hours and go to Albert Heijn, the big supermarket chain, and get a discount if you buy something there, which was again pushing even the time currency concept to the edges, where they say, okay, but the discount in the supermarket has nothing to do with time. Normally, if you have 2 time credits, you can access 2 hours of service, or if you want to go to the cinema, you need at least 2 time credits, because that's how long a movie is. They're kind of experimenting again what is actually possible if they have some monetary value linked to the time thing. The red note on the bottom, it's a note from Spice in the UK. Spice is a social enterprise that runs about 30 different time currencies all over the UK now. Super successful, coming from the valleys in southern Wales, where the situation after the mining industry collapse was really dire. And there had been a culture of self-help, of collaboration, of peer-to-peer activities in these communities that kind of vanished once everybody fell into a personal and economic depression after mines closed. These time currencies are just a way to actually reinvigorate that spirit in the community. People setting up groups, knitting groups, activity groups. They have been organized, they volunteer, they come together, they have cleanups. And that's why also made a good fulfilled environment there. And that is something that also local councils in the UK have recognized as a great way to actually achieve some of their social objectives in a way that they couldn't by just throwing more budget against some other organizations and activities. It's really outcomes, and Spice is really good at evidencing their outcome. If you look at, I'll show you the websites later, you can find the results in terms of impact and current statutory business. Spice has really fantastic results in terms of social and even individual well-being outcomes, and that is stuff you can't buy for money. That's really particular to these currencies. This is a little to say more about these economic currencies. The Solent was instigated many years ago, but only this May they finally started trading. It took them a number of years also because they were also again pushing the boundaries. Here you see Jean-Marc Ayrault, who was the mayor of Nantes, started the project as an Agenda 21 idea, traveling to Switzerland to visit the Leander Bank, which is a currency that now exists for 80 years in Switzerland. It's kind of the oldest of the last big wave of complementary currency that happened in the Big Depression in the 1930s. The Leander Bank has 60,000, or had 60,000, it's always fluctuating a bit, but it had 60,000 members all over Switzerland, all medium-sized enterprises, trading in a different currency, not the Swiss franc, even though those two currencies were at par, so a Leander franc was equivalent to the Swiss franc, but you couldn't exchange them. If you had Leander franc, you can only go to other businesses accepting them and pay them in Leander franc, but if it's 60,000 businesses, any entrepreneur who had a balance of Leander, for them it was just as good as money, so to say. And there is studies showing that this Leander franc economy actually was counter-cyclical to the Swiss franc economy. So that was one of the ways how Swiss businesses did better in a financial slump, because they had this other currency that came at no interest for them. So when interest rates were high at the banks, they would turn to the Leander franc and continue their turnover, continue their activities with their clients and their suppliers, just as before. So the guys in Nantes went there, had a look, checked out what's good about it, why that worked, and came back to Nantes and said, yes, we're going to do this. They did it a little bit in a different way, but I'm not going to go into the technicalities. In Nantes, one of the obvious differences is actually that businesses, it's primarily for businesses, and they get this interest-free credit. In Nantes, they also allow consumers, so everybody, to buy into the system by exchanging euros for this Solent currency. And as the city intends, at least, and there's a technicality in the way in terms of the food cards they use, but the city wants to open the public transport to this. They want to make it possible for local taxes to be paid in this, parking fees, car rental, the bicycle scheme they have there. Everything can then be accessed to this domain for everybody, probably at a discount to also encourage people to actually use this. And as I said, it's the local bank, which is publicly owned, that is running that scheme. In this realm, there's many hundreds and potentially thousands of these currencies out there in the world. IRTA stands for the International Reciprocal Trade Association, which is a body mostly in the US, and as the trade body for all these different currencies. There's a whole lot of activity in Australia, New Zealand in this area. There's a few companies in all the other countries. So in Germany, there's one company in Berlin doing this kind of offering a currency to businesses as a service, so to say. In Holland, there's a consultancy called Coin that is running one of those currencies. I'm not sure if there's one of those here, but it is a very common practice, but often disregarded by community currency people go saying, well, that's for profit. You're not looking at that's not interesting. But in terms of economic resilience, it is quite interesting, and one of our research questions would be what happened if we had one of those different currencies in every city, and every business would actually participate in those. And then there's a whole lot of other currencies. I just grouped them under sustainable behavior currencies. You see again this one from Belgium, the e-portemonnaie. Didn't even have a better name for the currency itself. It said it's based on an electronic wallet. And it's Limburg.net is the organization that runs the currency, or that started the currency. Limburg.net sounds very flashy, but it's actually just the waste disposal company of the region of Limburg, owned by 40 municipalities. So they got together to found this company that takes care of waste. But they didn't only have the mandate to take the waste to the dump or to burn it, but actually waste reduction was written into their mandate. And they came to the conclusion that the only way they actually can reduce waste is to tell the story, find some tools, find some incentives for people to actually start recycling more and actually producing less waste. So one of the iconic easy ways to earn some credit in your e-portemonnaie there is to actually have, for example, have a sticker on your postbox saying no advertisement, using the waste paper, and earning some points for that. But again, you can take to your municipality and buy a whole range of sustainable products. So a compost machine or energy-saving light bulbs. In some municipalities you can get bus tickets, in some municipalities you can even get shopping vouchers. Now the regional government participates in this, so independent of what your local municipality does, in the whole region you can go to museums, at least, and all the other public services that have an easy way to actually accept currency on this. And you access that, as I said, through your national identity number. On the left-hand side is one of the examples, again from the UK, which is pretty famous there, the Brixton pound. It has kind of a big sister now in Bristol, the Bristol pound. Those are currencies that are often, well, those are the things that are mostly called local currencies, and they are often questioned in terms of their economic impact, because they came out of the idea of saying, we need to keep money locally, we have to plug in local supplies and local shops and local traders, and not let it flow out of the community by going to a big supermarket chain that is owned by shareholders in the city of London or in Philadelphia. We have to have a different way of capturing that local, that economic activity locally. So these currencies you actually buy for your national currency. So Brixton pound, you hand over £10 sterling, you get 10 Brixton pound, which you can only use in the shops participating in Brixton, and the organizers there, it's an NGO, is very careful about not allowing McDonald's and Costa Coffee and Tesco to participate. So wherever you can spend it, you have you can be sure that it's somehow linked to the locality more. And Brixton used to be a very dodgy neighborhood. People were even afraid to go out at night. Now it's actually a very thriving, gentrified, hip neighborhood. Some people say because of the Brixton pound they did something wrong, that should not have happened, but that's not the impact of the Brixton pound, but the bigger economic development somehow, which many people are happy about, many others are really unhappy about. But what the Brixton pound, the Bristol pound, all these currencies really achieve quite well. There's the Chiemgau in Germany that does a very similar thing. There's about 40 now in France in different places, all in the same methodology kind of. What they're really good at is actually starting this conversation about money, challenging people's ideas that money is just this one thing that they grew up with and that they bought sweets with and that they have now to pay tax in, it can be different. And the founder of the Chiemgau in Germany, Christian Gallery, actually describes this idea and his intention for it to be actually a conversation currency, not an economic local development currency, but actually a conversation currency to open people's minds to the idea that money is something that one can design and change. How many for time?
1 minute.
Oh, where was the training?
Yeah, right.
Oh, okay, 1 more minute, great. So I'm just going to swap the Bitcoin things. I just had to bring in this one great quote that I was really happy about by the Danish central bank, saying Bitcoin has a utility value very similar to glass beads. Really helped to explain how Bitcoin, the currency, and I'm just looking through this, is actually nothing very special, as that was explained. The application of that currency, of that technology in the currency domain, nothing new there. What's really interesting is the technology, where I would also just challenge, well, part of this idea with you, maybe we can talk about it in the workshop tomorrow, that it's not so much a cryptocurrency as it's actually a transparency currency, because you don't need all these hierarchical institutions if everybody can see everybody's transactions and verify these transactions by themselves. But what I do want to mention for that last minute is
have a little bit of exercise.
that there are, of course, some people who are like, that's really interesting, what could we do? And a lot of people in the last 2 years have speculated about, we should have a Bitcoin for Greece, but that would be awesome. And they, mostly did the argument that they could actually stay in the euro if they had a currency by themselves, issue something by the state on whatever technology to allow local economy to happen again, while not having to completely cut the ties with the European Union, use the euro for whatever it's worth, have tourists come in and bring this in, pay back the debt in euro, but actually have more liquidity for Greece to kickstart that economy that is completely strangled by the lack of euros at the moment. That again is actually not a new idea. These are examples from Argentina, where over the last 100 years they always had regional currencies issued by the local government, the provincial governments. They had the peso from Argentina, from Buenos Aires, from the central bank, and they had their local provincial currencies on top of it, which were also tax debt cancellation bonds, as they call them. But that actually wasn't really a functioning system for 100 years, basically. And after the IMF stepped in, nobody knew really what happened. There's no documentation, but a lot of people say that IMF behind doors had actually told the government to prohibit these things to happen. Now, strangely, is kind of this thing that is now also happening at the Bank of England, at this old grand institution. Michael Kumhoff, who was at the IMF till recently and wrote some awesome papers about sovereign money and about other inequality. He was one of these scientists who actually snuck into a big, valuable, established institution and did whatever he liked there, which was really sweet. He's now at the Bank of England leading a digital currency research group. Despite all the slowness and the complication with what digital currency should actually mean, he would admit that they're actually looking for a way to issue electronic currency from the central bank. On the one hand, people say, there's only a Russian cash agenda, and there's a lot to be said about this, which I'm not going into, but on the other hand, positive money, for example, goes like, so they're looking into doing a positive money kind of thing, because they could, of course, issue a lot of this electronic currency. So we have something old, something new, something borrowed, which is money anyway, and something blue, just to hard that is blue. There's a proposal by my colleagues where a similar issue, but of course very different from Argentina and Greece, was happening in the UK, where Scotland had this referendum and basically fell down because people were afraid that if they went independent, they wouldn't have money anymore, because the politicians and investments that told them that they could not use the pound sterling, which of course is not true. Everybody can use any currency. You can't even pay your tax with euro in the UK, as it is at the moment. So my colleagues have now written this nice report that you can pick up and read. There's a lot of experiences and learning from other currencies saying Scotland can implement their own local currency in terms of Great Britain, but the currency from the government for all of Scotland now. So next time around, they can have a referendum and actually have a democratic process without the fear of financial establishment saying because they already have a complementary currency that then could just easily become the national currency. Here are the links if you want to know more. The top one is actually from my university. We do teach on these things, so there's a certified course that can be part of a postgraduate certificate or even a master in sustainable leadership development, where we have one module on complementary currency. Moneta is an old institution from Germany that is just relaunching their website. If you give it 2 weeks, there will be a very super comprehensive English website that talks about money, problems with money, solutions to money, and complementary currencies. And at the bottom, that's the EU project I mentioned several times. There's a number of great resources in there, some of which are also going to come into the workshop tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you. Perfect. So, we need some questions here. Here, the first one. Let's wait for the microphone. I heard that people have difficulties in hearing, so.
Yes. How about taxation? How do you tax these community currencies?
Yes. It's a great question and something that really puzzles people often. And in most of these currencies, as they exist at the moment, tax is paid in normal currency. So if you're a business in Brixton accepting the Brixton pound, you put that into your books as if you had income in pound sterling, and you declare that for your tax and you pay your tax in national currency, which of course would be a problem if you really try to only do business in the complementary currency. Imagine you did 100%, you only had Brixton pound, now you need pound sterling to pay the tax man. That wouldn't work so easily in many currencies. But on the other hand, that's never really the declared aim of a complementary currency. The name already says it's always in parallel with something else, it's just filling the gaps. So mostly you have always some income in national currency to pay the tax. Even in these business-to-business currencies that I said, they also are always at par with the national currency. So if business in Nantes has income and so on, they put that into the tax declaration as if it was euro. And yes, they need to have some euros to pay the tax, so they couldn't do all the business in that. But that, again, is never the declared aim. If, of course, there were more and more complementary currencies and you need more and more of your turnover in complementary currencies, the next step would be to also bring in the authorities, the public sector, to actually accept that for tax. That on the margin happens already. In Brixton, you can pay your business rate, so your business tax with Brixton pound, or by having Brixton pound, you can pay this. It still goes to the Brixton pound NGO that takes your Brixton pound and then pays out pound sterling to the municipality. In Bristol, the same is happening. In Nantes, they're trying. The further away you get from these currencies that have a relationship with pound sterling or with national currency, the harder it gets. So we'll see how quickly there will be a city that actually has an unredeemable currency and accepts tax. At the moment, there's great books, for example, in Barcelona, where the new elected government has declared in their manifesto that they will have a currency for, I don't know if it's actually the city of Barcelona or for Catalonia. And the methodology that they're looking at the moment will actually be credit creation in a complementary currency. So kind of combining a positive money scenario with a complementary currency scenario. That would only really make sense if they also accept that for tax. It's kind of it's one of these leading edges of complementary currency development. I don't think it's a necessity to make it happen, but if you could make that happen, it would be a very strong opportunity.
Silence. Do we have another question? It is.
If you just, otherwise, there are these workshops tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay, so if people have any questions there,
This is a question to the person because it almost seemed as if you said that it didn't really have the expected economic effect.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, they did. No, so they started off, so it started actually from a transition group. And the transition group, of course, were very concerned with local economy, with getting more production locally happening to support local traders who might be more likely to buy locally as well from suppliers and stuff. They did not achieve that very much, at least not in the way that they can prove. I always said there's not a single trader in Brixton that has not gone bust or does really well because of the Brixton pound. So they cannot prove that that actually does anything on the economic sphere. That's of course also a matter of size. In Bristol, the Bristol pound is much bigger and more turnover, but they have learned not to argue in these terms because it wouldn't add up in the numbers that you actually can say that's a material difference that they make to the local economy. However, they do achieve a lot of awareness raising and this education for local economic factors. So people using the bricks and pound, or people being confronted with it, have to consider what a local economy actually is good for and why you should care. So this indirectly contributes to this, but it's not in the economic domain where you can measure and improve that. If I talk about impact, there is a number of really great studies showing personal well-being impact for people participating in a time bank. People volunteer more, people are feeling more connected to their localities. There's some environmental impacts even in there. There's great work being done now from the University of Brussels, checking that Belgium incentive currency from the municipality, seeing if they can actually show, no matter how marginal these things are compared to the euro economy, if they can show that households participating are actually producing less waste, that there is actually at least a correlation there. And what they could already show is that people who participate through having this engagement in the municipality in a different way are more likely to respond to other calls for information or for participation by the municipality. So it works in kind of creating this different positive relationship between households. But when it comes to economic impact, my slide normally just shows mind the gap, because there isn't a hell lot. The currency in Switzerland is the one, the beer bank is the one where there are some quantitative economic studies done, because it existed over 80 years, has billions of turnover every year. You can actually have data to actually show, and it's still marginal compared to the Swiss economy overall, but at least showing that it's countercyclical, you can argue that it has a balancing effect, but that's about it when it comes to hardcore measurable economic impact. But then of course it depends if you blow open the concept of money, and you also need to blow open the concept of economy. And it's probably not only what is measurable on the terms of what you learn in this building, but it's a much wider concept, and I would argue that our social relationships belong as much to an economy as this way of interacting with each other that fulfills people's needs. It's just invisible to our metrics and our methodologies at the moment in the economics departments.
We have a question here.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I think it was very interesting. I would like to ask you a question because it's concerning the solutions, and we can be constructive about this. I was wondering if you knew about a resource-based natural law economy, where actually money is totally removed because we create abundance. The same as the air we breathe is for free because it's in abundance.
Yes.
And if we can create abundance, then we don't need money anymore. And so I was just wondering, what are your thoughts about the resource-based natural law economy?
I don't know that particular brand or concept, but there was a lot of also again questions and interactions and challenges from that side. And if you ask me personally, I would also much rather work towards the gift economy right away. I was considering to call this whole thing actually currencies of transition or transition currencies, because in a way it's very well to say we should all live in the gift and it should all be abundant, and why wouldn't we? But it just doesn't work this way so easily, and it might just be a communication and awareness raising and educational effort. For the Venus project, it's more like a computational problem where again you would end up with the same kind of high intense debates about calculus things where it's like, oh, you can't actually calculate everything that people would like to see happening for the fulfillment of their needs. So all these currencies might just be a way of actually opening up that domain to see what we actually need. Star Trek economics is a great other aspiration there, which is not so easy to achieve. The other thing to say, and that kind of relates to my very broad open definition of what a currency is, even in the gift economy, even in that concept that you said, I forgot the name already, but I'm sure there is an information system in there somewhere, somehow. Maybe let me tell another story from far away Indonesia, where in Ternate Raja on Sulawesi, maybe you've seen that on television, there's these fantastic funeral ceremonies that go for over a week, and people wait for 3 months until they have all the resources together to actually have these immense funerals. I was sitting there just as a little tourist going, oh, that's really exciting, and seeing how people streamed in bringing gifts and brought whole pigs or 10 chickens and all these things. There was an anthropologist sitting next to me who was quite aware of economic anthropology as well, and I said, look, don't think that these are gifts that they just freely give and everybody's happy and eats the pig. And he showed me where they bring in the pigs. There's actually a family who's organizing funerals actually sitting at a desk with a book. And they write down everything that every other family brings. It's not that they expect that back right away, but they know that over the next 100 years, between the two villages and the valleys and all the families in there, it will somehow balance. It's just the knowledge of what happened. And that way, money and currency for me is just the acknowledgement of what happens. It's not the thing itself, it's not what's matter, but it's an information system that informs and facilitates more of what's happening. And in this way, I also think in the gift economy, we will still have knowledge. I don't propose a currency for a family where you know what everybody else is doing. We have this on the small scale, that's very easy. On the big scale, we probably need some units to facilitate our gifts. And there's a lot to be said about reputation currencies, about university degrees as a currency, about our identity cards as a currency. That is all an information system that somehow enables something. So it's a sliding scale, it's not either.
I think we have the last question for today.
It's just I went to hear this guy from Copenhagen speak about currency in Denmark. He was like, he said we're trying to introduce this and the currency would drop in value so that it would switch hands quickly and, circulate so you don't hold on to your money. And I was just thinking how many people would agree to this kind of putting your money in and it loses value. Any of the ones who don't use this
Yes. None of the ones I mentioned have that feature, but I mentioned Chiemgau in Germany. That is very similar to the bricks and pound. But if you have it as a paper voucher, you actually have to buy a sticker every month and put on there for a percentage of what that bill is worth. And if you don't do this, the next person would have, so the voucher actually has less value if you don't buy that yourself. So that is a way to introduce a declining value. It's called demurrage, and there's a lot of debate and discussion about it. That idea was introduced by an economist called Sylvie Geselle, who was really fantastic, unrecognized, heterodox economist. But he was talking about, conceptually he talked about this to make money something more akin to everything else we have in the world. So you can't keep apples, but you can keep money, and you can hoard money, and you can accumulate money. And that, of course, leads to problems and difficulties. So he just wanted to introduce that natural feature of rusting or diminishing or molding to money as well. With the effect, he said, to actually make people not wanting to hold on to it, but to pass it on before it loses its value. And a lot of people allude to one experiment in the 1930s in a little village in Austria, Wörgl, where it had this feature, but it had many other features as well. A lot of currency enthusiasts would say that's what made it pass hands so quickly, and of course every time you pass on money, it generates GDP, so to say. It generates economic activity. If you hold on to it, it doesn't do anything. But it's in the complementary currency world, when you have small systems, it's a few people, a few transactions, it not necessarily is an advantage. On the one hand, economically, because it might just be displacing activity, and it's not so easy to prove that it does anything good. And what you mentioned is really just the other domain of communication and getting people to buy into it, to participate, which is a huge issue if you go further away from what people know. You really have to, on the one hand, capture them on an ideological basis, but in practice, that's a lot of work to keep people enthusiastic and participating in that way. Or they really just don't want to do this because why would they buy into something that is more complicated and less secure and less convenient than money as you have it. There's a lot of discussions about this, and some people, in terms of education and blowing people's mind open, it's actually a great thing to tell them. And this money actually deliberately loses value. That has an eye-opening element by itself. But many of the new currencies that we see out there now, the ones that are presented particularly, they rather try to focus on what benefit they bring to people instead of telling them, if you want a better world, you have to use this currency, rather than no, whatever, use this and you'll be better off for your interaction, for the things that you want to see, for your connection to your community, or even economically in these business currencies. You don't go business saying, for a sustainable world, you have to participate in our currency, because you go there, you'll sell all your underutilized resources, you'll have free access to a credit line, interest-free credit line, and we'll help you to market your product to this wide network that we have already. That's how you make that better. And there's a lot, I wondered if I should talk more see these golden temples in the city of London, and if you go to a payment system conference, they're the flashiest events ever. So they see a huge margin that this industry is sucking out of our everyday transactions. And of course, this margin could be captured in a profitable way for the users. These complementary currencies offer ways to actually do this and reap that benefit for the people. That's a nice